Hi y'all, I hope everyone is doing okay, especially after this past week. So here's what's happening. The first part of the second season of Arcane should be out today. If you don't know what it is an animated show on Netflix based off of the game League of Legends. Now that is literally everything I knew about the show prior to watching the first season and also prior to making this video. So I thought it would be fun if I learned a little bit about League of Legends lore so that I can share with y'all this information and then we could see how it compares to the actual show. Without further ado, here is the story of how I came across this lore, and keep in mind, we're barely gonna scratch the surface here. I don't want to get too technical with the lore, like when you throw at me all of these fictional names and fictional universes, you've lost me. So we're gonna keep this simple. If there are any League of Legends experts watching this, you're probably not gonna get much out of it. This is for the noobs, but feel free to correct me if I make a mistake, because against my every intention, I probably will. So going into this, I knew that Arcane was based off of League of Legends, the game. So you would think that would be the place to start to get some lore. There should be like a lore to the game and that translates to the characters and whatnot. So I go and look up the lore of League of Legends and the internet tells me, oh no, the game doesn't have anything to do with the lore, you stupid girl. What do you mean? So basically, the way that the current game is set up is sort of like Smash Bros, if you're familiar with that. You can play as a bunch of well-known characters and battle it out. So then, I'm sitting there confused and I'm like, okay, where can I find this lore then? So then I get directed to this map. Which is confusing because, again, I'm expecting a storyline of some sort within the game itself. So this came as a shock to me. A map, albeit an interactive one, seemed counterintuitive to be the core of League of Legends lore, because doesn't there need to be some systematic order to learn these pieces of the lore? To learn about the characters and the universe, some sort of timeline that I need to follow? Rather than me sifting through individual characters and lands one by one? Well, it turns out that's exactly what you're supposed to do. Learn about each individual piece of the puzzle one by one until you get a sense of the bigger picture. I learned that there isn't really an overarching narrative that the characters follow. Each individual character has their own background, their own story, and then after the fact, they can be woven together to form some sort of plot. And if you think that's kind of confusing already, oh, just you wait. But before we get into the thick of it, since we're talking about League of Legends gaming, if you happen to be a gamer out there, enjoy playing in your spare time, let me show you a way that you can earn money while doing that. You may be wondering, am I trying to give you some free money in this economy? Yes, that's exactly right. Free Cash, who is actually the sponsor of today's video, is a website with 4.7 stars on Trustpilot where you can earn money by doing simple tasks like playing games, downloading apps, and taking surveys. After signing up and enabling app tracking, which is an important step since Free Cash rewards you according to your progress, Free Cash will present you with offers that give you the opportunity to earn hundreds of dollars. If you're like me and like to play games in your spare time, why not gain some cash doing something you're already doing for free? That's why I chose one of my favorite games, Township. After spending time playing the game and completing tasks such as increasing my game level, I've already earned over $25, which I withdrew using PayPal. The first withdrawal amount is $20, but after that there is no minimum. There are a variety of platforms to choose from when withdrawing, such as Visa, Amazon, and bank transfers. You can also make in-app purchases to speed up your progress and receive cashback and bonus rewards. Use my link below or scan my QR code to get a $5 bonus on your first offer that you start with Free Cash. Depending on your country, your interface may look slightly different, but the functionality is the same. Thank you so much again to Free Cash for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. So a thing that I've seen a lot of people who are in the League of Legends fandom talk about is the inconsistency of the lore. One thing that hasn't changed, and by the way, I've referred to them as characters before, but they're actually called champions. In the olden days, years ago, these champions were controlled by summoners, aka the real-life person playing the game. There was a place where champions could battle it out, the League of Legends, and this was overseen by an Institute of War. However, this past version of League of Legends has since evolved. Summoners aren't a thing anymore, the Institute of War isn't a thing anymore, even the League of Legends isn't a thing anymore, which is ironic. And now we're gonna bring it back to this map. And this is the start of the era where like every character has their own story and whatnot, and you gotta learn about each individual one. This map details the universe of Runeterra, which is where all of the champions live. Given that there are almost 200 champions and you could see there are a bunch of different places that you could choose from, it's kind of overwhelming to learn about every single one of them, which is why I'm really only concerned with Arcane. We're gonna be focusing on the main champions in Arcane Arcane, where Arcane takes place, all of that stuff. So when we're looking at this map in terms of Arcane, we really only need to focus on this one section here, which is Piltover and Zaun. Everywhere else is not super relevant to the plot of Arcane yet, from what I understand. But basically, if you click on Piltover and Zaun, it'll show you the champions that reside in each of those regions. Each character has a biography and at least one short story to build on their lore. So that's the information that I'm going to be sharing with you today, the Runeterra lore, which differs from what happens in Arcane. So because of that, and because the Runeterra lore was created before Arcane, when the show was released, people automatically sort of assumed that this was some sort of alternate timeline, alternate universe, because there were things that differed from the pre-existing lore. But then pretty recently, the creators came out and were like, oh, hey, by the way, Arcane is canon. Which is kind of crazy. Not only that, they went on further to say that basically, if I'm understanding this correctly, from now on, everything is going to be centered around Arcane. Everything that will be put out from here on out won't contradict what Arcane already laid the foundation of. On top of that, the older stuff that isn't aligned with Arcane is going to be like retconned. Things are going to be changing so that everything is one cohesive universe. Everything is in line with each other, no more contradictions, no more confusion. So, yeah, that's the tea. It's understandable that there are so many contradictions because League of Legends is working with a lot of mediums. You've got the game itself, you've got the map, you got the short stories, you've got the comics. They even have released books. And as such, the lore is constantly shifting. There are so many different people working on so many different projects, a lot of moving pieces. Writers could even have contradicting opinions, which, is a problematic for the consistency of the lore. A lot of writers were laid off at one point, which affected things. This also isn't the first time that they've attempted to overhaul the existing lore. That's all to say that in the League of Legends fandom, everyone is very well acquainted with something becoming more or less canon depending on the writer, the circumstance, or for the sake of convenience. Now, with all that being said, it's time for what you've been waiting for. Let me tell you the stories, the lore of the main champions from Piltover and Zaun, aka the ones that are being featured in Arcane. And I compiled all of this information from the champion biographies as well as the short stories involving them, although I hope I didn't miss something major. It's not like I have a guide or anything though, all I have is a fucking map! This video is really the blind leading the blind, babes. I am not qualified for this. Anyways, so let's start with Caitlyn. And by the way, I'll also show you the League of Legends official artwork, I guess this is called. This is probably what they look like in the game. And so as you can see, a little bit of a different style compared to the Arcane show. I really like the Arcane style of animation though. I think it's super cool. I don't mind the change, but although I'm not used to the League of Legends design, so that's not really saying much. But anyways, so Caitlyn grew up in Piltover. She's incredibly smart, observant, by the books, has a very strong sense of justice. Her mother was like an important person of the clan, which is like a governing body, I guess, in this society. And so one day, both of Caitlyn's parents were abducted when Caitlyn was out of the house. Caitlyn was able to single-handedly track down the thugs and rescue them. While doing so, she finds out that the thugs were hired by someone going under the name C, like the letter C. So this mysterious C figure is Caitlyn's enemy from now on and is pretty much the only person that she can't track down. She becomes a sheriff in Piltover and is gifted this really cool rifle from her parents. She's able to shoot things from like a mile away. That's an exaggeration, only by a little bit. She's an excellent shot. Then we have Vi. Her original lore, I went to the archives because the biographies of the champions, at least the ones from Arcane, have changed slightly from the original blurbs that were written about them. And so I wanted to find what was originally written about them on the website. And so I found this other website that showed the past biographies. And when I read the first one, it said that she's originally from the lawless outskirts of Piltover, which is interesting because ever since then, she's been from Zahn, and that's been an important part of her character and her backstory. But anyways, from the same like original lore story, it said that she robbed and she cheated to get by. She was very much, you know, a criminal. She has the skills of a mechanic, and she even started her own gang. There was this one time where she caught wind of something happening in like the mines or something, so she contacted this other gang to help her out with this heist. However, during this heist, the other gang endangered the people working there. So Vi decided to be heroic, and she ripped these two like metal arms off of a robot contraption that was working down there, and she clamped the arms around her hands and created these like big metal gauntlets. And so her character then becomes really associated with these huge gauntlets. And so that's her like signature weapon. A lot of these champions in Arcane have a signature weapon, and Caitlyn's is the rifle, Vi's is the gauntlets. So after this event, Vi started to see how her way of living was affecting the people around her. So she started to only target like criminals if she were to commit any crimes against someone. Caitlyn caught wind of this and was like, hey Vi, come join me in Piltover, and if you work with me, I'll like, I don't know, excuse your crimes that you've committed in the past. Like, this is how you'll repay your debt to society. Vi saw this as an opportunity to do what she was already doing, except without having the police after her, so she said yes. So Vi is now working for the police now in Piltover as Caitlyn's partner. So like I said, revisions to her lore, I believe, say that she's definitely from Zahn. And also, when the heist was going on, instead of creating the gauntlets herself, she stole them from one of the other gang members who was already wearing them. Also, they added that she was orphaned as a child, although she was found in like some sort of crib carrier meant for 2 children. Interesting. Also, one thing to note is that Vi's, I want to say Vi's main character trait is that she's incredibly violent. Can't spell violent without Vi. I really can't emphasize enough how much she likes to solve any problem whatsoever by fighting. She is brash, she's reckless. The criminals that she catches and gets asked to interrogate get so beaten up that before their trial, they have to bring in a surgeon just so they can speak again. She also has this swagger about her that I've seen in the short stories. She, I would say, is a little bit more arrogant and vulgar compared to show Vi. There's this one line at the end of her current bio that says the reason that she's working with Caitlyn may have something to do with Jinx, which then brings us to Jinx. Now, the connection between Vi and Jinx in the Runeterra lore is not very explicit. It's left a little bit up to mystery, but as time went on, several hints here and there indicated that they definitely had some sort of shared past, and now of course with Arcane, they're confirmed to be sisters, but that definitely isn't mentioned outright in this Runeterra lore. There are not a lot of details about Jinx. As the story goes, Jinx was an innocent enough child in Zahn, and then something tragic happened, something that she continues to be haunted by, which turns her into the kind of chaotic, psychopathic, maniac, explosive loving criminal that she is now. She's definitely an agent of chaos. Her attacks are seemingly random, although I think there was a detail somewhere that said that there is a correlation between her and crimes against like the wealthy or merchants or higher up peoples, and I forget what that said actually. So after doing all of these crimes, you know, colorful explosions, leaving graffiti at the scene of the crime, the people collectively started referring to her as Jinx. So they gave her her criminal name, Jinx. No one, I mean, the lore does not specify at all what her actual name is. Who Jinx was as a kid and who she is now are so different that the people that knew of Jinx as a child don't even recognize her as who she is now. Like, if they saw who Jinx was now, they would not put it together that it was the same child that they knew in Zahn. Her and Vi are enemies. She seems to have this obsession with Vi, and Vi seems to be super intent on catching her right back. There was this one story where Jinx made an announcement through, you know, graffiti left at the scene of the crime, where she said the exact day that she was going to rob this treasury. When that day arrived, it turns out she snuck herself inside a couple days prior, and so she was just going to town in there. Vi realized what was happening because, you know, she and Caitlyn were there at the scene, you know, to make sure nothing bad happened, and Vi rushed in alone, and she and Jinx started battling for a period of time by themselves because, you know, Vi was the first one to get there, but Jinx ended up escaping by blowing up the building. She did not take a single penny. This was pretty much only to taunt Vi. Jinx has a Yordle friend at one point named Ziggs, and if you don't know what a Yordle is, if you're familiar with Professor Heimerdinger from the show, that's the same sort of species of Yordle. Heimerdinger's a Yordle. I didn't do any research on Heimerdinger's lore. Apologies. I just, hate to say it, wasn't particularly interested. Although I feel like spicy things have happened with him. Like, I feel like there's some interesting things about his lore, so if I missed that, let me know. Also, one more thing about Vi and Caitlyn. There was this short story called, well, actually, it was pretty long compared to the other short stories, but it was called Child of Zaun. Basically, Caitlyn asks Vi to go down to Zaun to see what's happening down there because there were some interesting, mysterious things happening. Caitlyn was keeping a lot of the details to herself, though. She was just like, Vi, go down there. You have to leave your gauntlets here. Best of luck, babe. So Vi ends up going to the orphanage that she grew up in and seeing this girl named Ro. She and Vi grew up together, but she's a lot younger than Vi. Vi ends up finding out that a lot of people have been overtaken by this ideology symbolized by a spider. This guy was acting as a sort of priest. He was called the Voice because he served as the voice of the Dreadnought. So the Dreadnought was speaking through him. Turns out the Dreadnought is this champion named Urgot, and he wants to purge Zaun of the unworthy. So Urgot kills the guy acting as the Voice, and he releases this like toxic gas, and basically if you don't end up dying from it, that symbolizes that you are potentially a part of the worthy. Ro is, an adamant believer of whatever sort of ideology Urgot was throwing down, so she happily dies in front of Vi by inhaling this toxic gas. Vi is able to escape, and then Caitlyn and her end up battling Urgot and eventually, successfully captured him. But this whole experience opened Vi's eyes in a sense and made her question the concept of justice, right and wrong, law and order. Obviously, she knew that what Urgot doing was wrong, but like seeing the conditions down there and also the fact that Caitlyn was keeping things from her, maybe not doing what's in the best interest for the people of Zaun, potentially. There were a lot of questions that she was pondering. Now we have Echo. Echo's so cool. I love him. He's from Zaun, a super genius, a prodigy. His parents have super high hopes for him, and because of that, they want him to go to Piltover and study because they grind all day, every day just to make ends meet, and they do not want that life for him. But Echo, he doesn't want to turn his back on Zaun. He befriends orphans and runaways. One day, he finds a shard of a hex crystal, and so he uses it to power one of his own inventions called the Z Drive. And this allows him to go back in time and redo whatever event just occurred. The only limit to the amount of times that he can go back is his body's exhaustion. A lot of champions use tools powered by hex crystals, and then this becomes their signature weapon. I mentioned we have Caitlyn's rifle, Vi's gauntlets, Echo's Z-Drive, Jace and his hammer, which we'll get to in a second, Victor and his mechanical augmentations, which we'll get to in a second, and then Jinx and her rocket launcher, which kind of looks like a shark, and that's called Fishbones. We see that at the end of Arcane. Now we have Jace. Low-key, I love him. I know he's super unpopular in the show. I don't really care about him in the show at all. He's just a man. But in the lore, he is incredibly, unbearably arrogant, which makes him super sassy. And you know what? Hate to say it, but I enjoy the quips of a sassy man from time to time. What can I say? Basically, he's this brilliant inventor from Piltover, and he made the first great discoveries in the field of hex tech with his buddy-ish, Victor, who's from Zaun, also a brilliant inventor. Jace is arrogant, dismissive, unwilling to slow his pace, and constantly leaves his fellow peers in the dust. Only one person matched his intelligence and didn't mind his attitude. My Pookie Victor. They met at a party and immediately bonded over not wanting to be there. Hilarious. Then they started working together. Jace sought to improve humanity via versatile technology. He wants to progress society, and as time moves on, he becomes more and more aware of how his inventions are widening the divide between Piltover and Zaun. Victor, however, wants to solve problems inherent to humanity itself, like sickness that comes from bodily decay, the hatred and prejudice that comes from human emotions. Even though they were different and constantly butted heads, they both mutually respected each other's intelligence, and also they both knew what it was like to be ostracized by their peers. However, they had a major falling out when Victor was designing a suit that was intended for underwater divers, I think, and in order to make it safer and reduce the amount of deaths on the job, he made it so that the wearer, like the person, could control the wearer's emotions like fear, and that he also made it unable for the person wearing the suit to disobey their superiors. And Jace saw that as taking away a person's free will. So he reported Victor, and then Victor was subsequently cast out of the scientific community by the Academy. So then he went back to Zon and he disappeared for a while. Then a gem was found in the desert and was eventually brought before Jace. He didn't know what it was at this point, but spoiler alert, it was a hex crystal. While Jace was experimenting on it, it gave off a burst of energy, which Victor noticed because he was doing something down in Zon. So he showed up at Jace's doorstep and basically asked if he could use the crystal and they could start working together again, because he was working on a project down in Zon which he believed would start humanity's glorious evolution. Because Jace no longer trusted Victor, he said no, and then Victor took it by force. However, in one of Jace's experiments, he broke off a shard of the crystal, and so he still had that. He put it into a hammer that he was making, and so hence the creation of his weapon, his hammer, and the shard of the crystal ended up leading him to Victor's lair because of the pull between, you know, hex crystals, I guess. When he got there, he saw corpses littering the ground, their skulls empty, and he saw an army of metal soldiers connected, powered up to the hex crystal. Victor ordered the army to kill Jace, but after knocking some of them out, Jace eventually targeted the hex crystal itself. He smashed it to bits, it shattered, the place came crashing down in an explosion. Victor's body was never found, and Jace was praised as the defender of tomorrow. In one of the short stories, Victor attacked Jace with his minions that were like chemically altered or something like that, but Jace was successful and Victor wasn't able to get any more hex crystals. The short story was funny because we could clearly see Jace's personality. A little girl ended up stumbling into his workshop and they started talking, and at one point after, you know, he continuously made rude comments, she was like, "What's wrong with you?" And he responded, "Most facets of my personality, so I've been told." He also called this little girl stupid at one point, iconic behavior. But now, let's get back to Victor because my Pookie has been through it. So Victor's main goal is to help people and preserve lives, period. He will do that at the expense of changing what makes a person human, like their physical body, their emotions. Because of that, he isn't understood by a lot of people. His inventions seek to remove human error, and they're very successful at doing that. Before he was exiled, he built a golem, which from my understanding is similar to a robot, and he did this because there was a chemical spell in Zon, and so he left his studies in Piltover in order to help the people down there. When he got back, the professor that originally scouted him and invited him to study in Piltover took credit for the invention of his golem. No one defended Victor or called out the professor, including Jace. Victor fell into a depression, and then when he went back to Zon for good, he continued his work. He became known as the guy you would go to when you're desperate because you could come back with a whole bunch of metal augmentations. He starts operating on himself, and he becomes a man made of like steel and science. He removes the parts of himself controlled by emotion, and then slowly but surely he becomes less human and more obsessed with the glorious evolution of humanity, which essentially is to become more like him, mostly machine. His mechanical augmentation work saves a lot of lives in Zon, and he also ends up developing a bit of a following. It turns out the reason that he was building the metal soldier army was to save the brains of people who had been in some sort of tragic accident, like the brains could only be preserved at that point. And the only reason that Victor tried to kill Jace was because he knew that Jace wouldn't protect those lives. And then we have Victor's short story, which was kind of cute in an eerie sort of way. A boy who is being bullied comes into Victor's lair. Victor helps the boy play a prank on the bullies, and then he teaches him about fear and how to not let fear control you. He gives the boy a temporary serum to eliminate his fear, and then the boy is able to go out there and stand up to the bullies, make them stop picking on him. I'm really curious to see what Arcane Season 2 is going to be like and what elements from the lore they're going to throw in there. I think that Season 1 was really well executed, and I also think that the new elements they've thrown in there have been cool. Silco, who is the main villain in Arcane the first season, isn't a champion. I don't think he existed before Arcane, although some say that he bears resemblance to an existing champion called Shaco. There's also the character Vander, who was acting as Vi and Jinx's adopted father early on in their life. And apparently in season 2, he's going to become the champion known as Warwick. Although in this case, it's pretty tragic because the Vander that, we've seen in the first season is dead and gone. He's not coming back. He is essentially, his body is a vessel for what is now going to be Warwick. Crazy stuff. Anyway, so that was the lore of the main Arcane champions. I found it interesting and a fun time. I hope you did as well. Now you'll have a little bit more insight when people talk about fan theories and stuff. Now I don't know about y'all, but I need to go and watch season 2. I'm excited. I'll see you later. Bye.